Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It is program number 815 and July the 20th, 1987. I have to make apologies for a hoarse throat. I've been using my voice a lot. In addition to World Watchers, I've done a lot of interviews of various radio programs around the country this past week, and I think I have used my voice too much. Many of you don't know, and I do have an unusual voice, I suppose, a little raspiness in there. I have had 2 operations on my vocal cords. They were a long time ago, and the voice works pretty good, but I should not use it for so many broadcasts. And this week I'm not going to do any, and I'm going to cut down on those. Incidentally, I was reading an article on Ronald Reagan's decision to invade Grenada was partly influenced by Claudette Colbert, who has property on the island of Barbados, and she was worried about communist Maurice Bishop and the islands nearby. And Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan went down to her place 1 or 2 times. They've been long friends from Hollywood, and one of the papers, Parade Magazine, or one of them said that she was the one who kind of coaxed Reagan to overtake Grenada and get rid of the communists. It was Claudette Colbert's husband, Dr. Joel Pressman, who did the 2 surgeries on my throat. The last one was 32 years ago, and everything's been pretty good since then. But no, I take it back. There was one 10 years later. But I have to give those vocal cords a rest, cut down the telephone time. So if it sounds a little raspy here, it is. But the fact that I could use my voice as long as I did and hope to use it in the future was Dr. Joel Pressman, the late husband of Claudette Colbert. He passed away a few years ago. There's a long article in one of the newspapers, and they're repeating it on the radio every 5 minutes, I suppose, on the cost of keeping the hearings going, the Iran-Contra hearings, and the special prosecutor that may come to $6 million. I would like the listeners of World Watchers to participate and help me by writing to members of Congress, people with the last name of A to L, perhaps write to the House of Representatives, those with the last name of M to Z, write to the Senate and ask an estimate cost of keeping our ships in the Persian Gulf at a time where members of Congress don't approve, our allies don't approve, and forget it, if we have a shooting war, the cost couldn't be estimated. But what does it cost to flag the Kuwait ships and keep our battleships and planes flying over them to allow Kuwait to deliver the oil to Iraq and around the world? Now, I mentioned several times, and most of you saw the news accounts of that secret plot that William Casey at the CIA, the Defense Department, were brewing for a long time to have a self-financed, super-secret intelligence operation that I compared to the Super Seize Me in Italy that Michael Ledeen and Alexander Haig were a part of. A government outside of the National Security Council. The NSA director doesn't have to be approved by the Senate or any member of Congress. The National Security Council and the National Security Agency have no freedom of information where you get access or facts about their past. So outside of their agencies is still a more secret little door, and we've talked about this, and I will continue to bring up this topic as frequently as it is necessary. But I just want to cite a change in perception around the world, and particularly in one newspaper out in San Francisco, the San Francisco Examiner. This paper was founded and owned by the Hearst family, very conservative. They were very pro-Hitler. They had many articles by Goering and Goebbels, and now they carry the news this way that sounds like Mae Brussell. Big headlines across the front of the page. Government within a government. North drops a bombshell about Casey's secret plan. Well, Casey came from the OSS and the Office of Strategic Services, and then went into the CIA when it was formed, and has been part of the inner team since World War II. It's interesting, though, to see these headlines on a paper like the Examiner. My first published article in The Realist in 1972 described 2 governments side by side, a federal emergency management system, and James McCord was part of a 16-member team of that group that was originally set up by Ronald Reagan and Edwin Meese and the Defense Department, with a nucleus for fermenting the original problems from rounding people up coming out of here from California in the minds of Reagan and his associates. It's interesting now, though, to see the San Francisco Examiner with a headline that covers the basis of the material that I've been trying to explain on the air for 16 years. A few weeks later, just this last Sunday, the 19th San Francisco Examiner has an editorial. William Randolph Hearst III is the editor and publisher. The buck stops where? And, pardon me. The editorial says, here was the long-awaited moment of accountability. Who authorized the diversion of arms sales and the profits to Iran to go to Nicaragua? The buck stops with me, said Rear Admiral John Poindexter. And who indeed was John Poindexter to be letting the buck stop with him? Harry Truman made the assertion because he was president, and when the policy decision of this magnitude, it should go to the president. We're talking about a decision to collide with the will of Congress on a matter of armed conflict abroad and set up a secret apparatus to which funds would flow. So secret that even the president didn't know any of the particulars, the admiral said. He did that so the Oval Office persons could have deniability. Well, the editorial says it is a thin and odious web that Poindexter wove, and Poindexter is an admiral who graduated number 1 in his class in Annapolis out of 900 students. While it gives Reagan technical legal protection, it does not remove him from final responsibility. Everything with tar on it was too neatly and consciously avoided by the president and his top administrators, and when the lid finally was blown on the arms sales fiasco, Poindexter resigned as head of the NSC. Nobody at the top asked him as he departed the White House whether he approved the diversion of the arms sales to the Contras, which later he said he did, but he didn't tell the president. Nobody there wanted the information because it was politically and legally radioactive. I should go back and say he only admitted that he approved of the diversion when one memo was found. He was assured by Ollie North that they were all destroyed, so he could say, this deniability. But one was found, then he had to take the responsibility. Poindexter was allowed to leave, carrying it off as if he didn't know what happened, and obviously he was confident beforehand that he was carrying out the larger intent of the president on a no-questions-asked basis. Reagan had made the point with the Congress that he wanted to fund the Contras. The details of getting the legislative ban he just left to others, foremost of those being an admiral and a lieutenant colonel. 2 members from the Defense Department, 2 still wearing their uniforms, and they were the ones responsible, the Pentagon were. And if you heard the testimony of Poindexter, he said that Oliver North never spoke at a meeting where the president was unless he gave him a nod, and nothing went to the president that didn't pass in front of his desk. So that the admiral from the Pentagon literally runs the NSC. And then the question is, what role does Fritz Kramer on the NSC, who was plans officer of the Pentagon through the entire Vietnam War over General Westmoreland and Abrams, sitting there, does he have the control over the admiral, being the elder statesman who had such a big job in the Pentagon and who shares offices with Daniel Graham, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency? Now, the editorial of the San Francisco Examiner, of all places, says this whole-wrenching process has illuminated the serious question of how the constitutional balance of power can be made to work. It is time to evaluate the role Congress should properly play. The hearings have ironically showed that Congress was not only an imperfect instrument in foreign affairs, but Reagan had learned to get the better of it. For it is not Reagan's interest is not at stake, not just Reagan, but the future of American policy on the world scale. And what I have said continuously on the air with World Watchers or wherever I was, speaking or writing, the problem isn't the CIA, it is the National Security Council. It is the National Security Agency with the executive branch that tilted the Constitution, and the future of American policy all over the world is in danger if the admirals and generals make all decisions and move towards these fascist governments that they've put into power. They've made them possible, and now they're allies. Carl Bernstein wrote an article for the Washington Post July 14th, it was reprinted in the New York Times, TV anchormen are missing the big story of the hearings. And he blasts out about the point of Tom Brokaw and some of these various persons being in the news media, missing and covering up what these hearings are about. Now, he has the same fault. He covered up the whole point of Watergate, the planned coup in 1972, the Lewis Tackwood allegations, Squad 19, the Federal Emergency Management Group, where Reagan at that time period was still governor, working with Edwin Meese, the plans for the San Diego Convention in Reagan's home state. Carl Bernstein wouldn't touch any of that, and they missed the point of Watergate, what was planned for the convention in Miami after it moved from San Diego, but was stopped because the men arrested at the Watergate Hotel had money and banking accounts that would link to people who had already been given guns and agents provocateurs in the Miami area to create a situation to cancel our constitutional rights and to kidnap and round up the radicals. It's easy for Carl Bernstein to write that persons in the hearings are giving one message and the news media comes up front and misinterprets it or misses the point. But I believe we are where we are today because people like Carl Bernstein wouldn't get the point of Watergate, even though they were informed, and missed the point then. And when you cover up that, it is, again, one more piece of scandal that is allowed to putrefy and rot and then reappears in another stinking form and reemerges. People involved with the Watergate, like William Casey and Mr. Buchanan, was writing a very important article today, syndicated column under Enterprise Incorporated. I wonder if it was paid for by Secord. But the important thing is that by covering up Watergate and then going back covering up the Kennedy assassination, I don't know where Carl Bernstein was at that time, but the whole news media missed the point on the Warren Report, the Kennedy assassination, and they missed it at Watergate, and now he's accusing them, the anchorman, of missing the point now, and he can join the crowd for being part of the cover-up, and nobody can be clean, and a lot of people can point fingers at each other, and it isn't going to solve our problems. Now, 1974, July the 11th, Jack Anderson wrote an article, and as he's told you many times in interviews and on TV, he's in and out of the Defense Department and the White House. This is what he wrote. Preparing for the Big One. This is 1984, 3 years ago. Secret Pentagon planning documents raise the specter of a confrontation in the Persian Gulf between the United States and the Soviet Union. This is sort of the flashpoint that could ignite the nuclear power keg, the big one being World War III. Most scenarios circulating inside the Pentagon forecast an Iranian victory, a possible Iranian victory, followed by the spread of Ayatollah Khomeini's Muslim fundamentalism in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Persian Gulf states. As settling as this would be, it probably wouldn't provide a Soviet-American conflict. This is the script they had several years ago. Let's watch it this week. We start flagging the Kuwait ships. It wouldn't be enough to make war with Russia if Iran won the war against Iraq and spread themselves south into the other countries in the Persian Gulf. But the opposite outcome, a desperate escalation of the war by Iraq with the destruction of Iran's oil export facilities, with the collapse of the Iranian economy, would bring the Soviets. What they planned in the Pentagon is if the Iraqis get strong, and the United States is going to tilt Iraq now with Kuwait to help them against the war in Iran. If Iraq is strong and destroys Iran's oil export facilities, and we're talking about first strikes against Iran, then the Soviets would come down to protect Iran, and then the United States would fight the Soviets. One of the secret Pentagon documents examined by my associate Donald Goldberg emphasizes that the scenario is merely a hypothetical war that portrays enemy capabilities as indicated by intelligence estimates. Now, after Salvador Allende was murdered in Chile and Augusto Pinochet was put in by the Defense Department, the CIA, ITT, and other corporations, it turned out that they had scenarios and scripts and hypothetical wars that were studied up at the universities in New England, and those hypothetical war contingencies were used for the overthrow of Allende, the stabilization of the economy, breaking up the unions and strikes and so forth, building up to a 10-part plan for taking over Chile. Now, Jack Anderson says, here is the secret scenario, which begins 65 days before open combat between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I suggest maybe you make copies of this tape to send to members of Congress that you think might be interested. They may not remember this article. Minus 65, the Iranian economy is in ruins. The volatile Iranian people rise up against Khomeini and his mullahs, causing dissolution of the central authority in Iran. That's minus 65 to World War III, keeping in mind Ronald Reagan's Armageddon philosophy, and also what Oliver North was doing, according to documents that have been released and news articles not brought up in front of the Iran-Contra hearings, was to send arms to people like Mr. Ghorbanifar, who was part of the Savak, to get weapons in the hands of Iran, to have an uprising and to kill Khomeini, which would create a response, a confrontation between the various elements. And the script here was that before we would fight Russia, there would be this confrontation of the Iranian people against Khomeini, against each other, to disillusion of the central authority. Minus 62, 3 days later, the Soviet forces in Transcaucasus, north of the Caucasus and Turkestan, begin selective mobilization because they believe that America is going to come into the Iranian Sea. The United States responds by moving its forward deployed carrier and amphibious force into a better position, which is what we're getting ready to do now. Minus 37, the Kremlin reaffirms its 1921 friendship treaty with Iran and continues the preparation for the invasion. The United States deploys additional AWAC planes and naval forces. Remember that Oliver North and General Secord participated in a plan, and North got a medal for it, whereby he got Congress to send the AWACS to Saudi Arabia, many AWACS, and we promised AWACS to Jordan, and we are delivering these as fast as we can. Minus 23 days till World War III, or confrontation of U.S. with Soviets. United States intelligence reports up to 10 Soviet divisions are conducting training operations on the Iranian border, which we've heard in this recent testimony. We don't know if it's true or not true, but those pro-Contra, dealings with Iranians are the basis that the Russians are on the border, this many are there, and this was written up in 1984. They're conducting training operations. President Reagan will call up 1,000 reserve troops and put U.S. forces around the world on a low-level alert. Supplies begin moving toward the Persian Gulf. And just read your papers for the last month and see how the supplies are moving. Minus 16, the Soviet Union announces that it is prepared unilaterally to unilaterally invoke the 1921 treaty, which permits the Soviet troops to move into Iran. The United States intelligence detects a major increase of traffic on the Soviet railroads in the provinces bordering Iran. Minus 12, the U.S. intelligence determines that a Soviet invasion of Iran is imminent, and partial mobilization begins in the United States. On D-Day, the Soviet air attacks throughout Iran paved the way for a massive invasion of 24 Russian divisions to protect the Iranians against the United States moving into there. The United States Air Force and Soviets engage in combat over the skies of Iran. U.S. intelligence detects heightened Cuban readiness, and the United States warns Cuba. Plus 2 more days, the United States determines that the Warsaw Pact preparations have reached a level that indicate an attack is likely on Western Europe. Washington calls formal NATO mobilization. Plus 6 more days, NATO mobilizes, and the U.S. rushes in their full-scale reinforcements. The Soviet bloc forces smash into Western Europe, and at least 90 divisions, and on the other side of the globe, North Korea could attack South Korea. Now, with that in mind, I'm going into the subject of Iran. I was going to also briefly mention, before I get into continuation of Iran, that Newsweek has an article blaming Oliver North for leaks and disinformation. And this is very important because the excuse for the persons in the National Security Agency and National Security Council never telling Congress the truth, and in fact lying to them, is that they leak. And the truth is that leaks come out from Oliver North, and leaks came out from North about the Berlin disco that caused he and Poindexter to bomb Libya, and leaks came out from them about other incidents involving the Achille Laura and the TW Air flight. And so that those leaks from those people that are absolute lies that they're blaming on members of Congress could instigate a World War III, because they have the mouthpiece that they're blaming on Congress. And thank goodness Newsweek, which is not, again, a very liberal, some people think it is, I think it's more like the Randolph Hearst newspapers, is concerned with the lies that we are being told. The Wall Street Journal had a story today. Congress and the press continue the tug of war over the constitutional authority on foreign policy. That, again, will continue on and on until the National Security Council is recognized for being the agency that tilted the balance of our Constitution as it was written. These members of Congress keep signing the Constitution. There is the legislative, the members of Congress, there is the executive, which is the president, and there is the judiciary, which is the Justice Department and Supreme Court. But when the National Security Council was made in 1947, as soon as Reinhard Gehlen came to this country and Hitler's top advisors were brought to this country, along with British intelligence and William Stevenson, they created an office that lopsides the executive branch, and they pound into his ear what he's to know. They pound into his ear how many troops are on the Russian border. They tell him how many tanks are here and there. Then if Congress doesn't believe them or questions them, then they go ahead and act on what the president is told, because the president would respond the way they want, being given the facts he was told. And they can give lies, they can give leaks, they can give propaganda, and what they're doing doesn't work. And the fact that it doesn't work is proved in many, many books and articles that are coming out. William Pfaff, a writer from Paris who I quote many times, has an article this week, "The United States is a war behind." And he said it's not only the generals who are a war behind, the officials, the politicians, the policymakers, and this goes into the 40 Committee, the National Security Council, they are way behind. People commonly are shaped by decisive historical events in their youth. We think of the Western powers who resisted Hitler at Munich, who failed to resist him at Munich, and the American policymakers later, the generation said that we should continue now and not give in to totalitarianism because we were weak in recognizing Hitler at Munich. And William Pfaff, who lives in Paris, said, we have misidentified as Hitlerian threats all through the 1950s and all through the 1960s what were not Hitlerian effects on our culture. Those were the last war. He says the veteran officer of the CIA, William Casey, came out of the OSS. The CIA was not the OSS. The Office of Strategic Services fought when a moral and political choice was plain, when choices were plain. Americans had no doubt about their cause during the time of Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco. And when the people who collaborated with the OSS happened to be the best of their generation, writers and thinkers and so forth, he said virtually every time the CIA tried to act as the OSS, and the CIA was formed in 1947 by Reinhard Gehlen and Hitler's top people, when the CIA tries to act as the OSS, it finds itself making unsustainable promises and eventually betraying those who they gave their trust. The American administration in power would discover its secret wars are going nowhere. They're ceasing to be secret. They're provoking political unease or opposition at home, and the coming liabilities with respect to other policies being pressed would call them off. He says, and I cite the Iranian case where we overthrew Mossadegh and put in the Shah, killed Mossadegh, Guatemala where Arbenz was killed, Dominican Republic with Trujillo killed, in Dallas where our own president was killed, in Vietnam when Diem was killed, in Pakistan where Bhutto was killed, in Chile when Allende was killed, in South Korea when the president was killed, in Palau when the president was killed. We had coups we removed the president in Bolivia, and we've had these endless coups where people were forced out of office, and I've cited just a few that have been murdered. That doesn't cover Lumumba in the Congo and all, when they begin to get their independence. That you could go on, and I do many times. But these things are all failure. And Mr. Pfaff says the agency found that those who would collaborate in its enterprises were not so often so selfless patriots of the war years. Some were heroes. More than were heroes were mercenaries. We have trained mercenaries that are sent out by Robert Brown and General Singlaub. They're marginals. The best collaborators of William Casey and Colonel North the only ones they could find for their Iranian operation were an officer who had retired under an ethical cloud, an Iranian business partner who declared he was in it for the money, an Iranian fixer with whom the CIA considered a liar, that was Mr. Ghorbanifar, and a Saudi Arabian commission man, that's Adnan Khashoggi. Mr. Pfaff says the CIA officer I quoted above says of the Contras, the officer said they are our equivalent for Central America of Franklin Roosevelt's WPA. The Contras give hungry peasants' kids a chance to make money. The peasant kids, they are risk, but what do those kids know about what they're getting into? The American public will not go to war to put the Contras in power, and they will prove unable to seize power alone. A lot of bloodletting will end in nothing. Casey's project for a privately owned, off-the-shelf, self-sustaining, standalone Secret Service and his willingness to go along with Iranian arms sales, even though Iran wasn't freeing the hostages, so has raised money to pay for the enterprise, which seems to be what was happening, amounted to an effort to recreate an OSS to do what he could not make the CIA do. Yet the reason the CIA disappointed him is that this is 1987 and is not 1942. Mikhail Gorbachev is not Adolf Hitler, Daniel Ortega is not Adolf Hitler, and Nicaragua is not Vietnam. Now that comes out of Paris and pretty well summarizes in the convoluted way, in the way we think of the past and try to put it to the present. And I might also say that the freedom fighters are not the Abraham Lincoln Brigade either. When they came home, they didn't have jobs. These freedom fighters are each going to have $1 to $2 million profit, make movies, write books. The others were blacklisted and couldn't make a bit of money, and that's what Mr. Pfaff wrote. Now, getting back to the Gulf, the paper this past week was July the 19th, yesterday. Monterey Herald, U.S. told to prepare to take hit in the Gulf. The United States has to be ready to take a hit from Iranian speedboats, startling as this may be. The Navy will help these reflagged Kuwaiti tankers in the Persian Gulf going in and out of the area, but we have to understand the Iranians' capability is largely to harass and embarrass, not to halt the flow of oil, and there is a danger that they will hit our ships, and then we will have the excuse to hit back. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Hashemi Rafsanjani, has promised to attempt to further embarrass President Reagan, almost reeling from the Iran-Contra disclosures. When the U.S. warships enter the Gulf, said Rafsanjani, we will point part of our military artillery at the Yankees and take American captives with their hands on their heads with humiliation. We're ready to take them on. These people lived under the Savak, under the torture, under being called all kinds of names as if they were the scum of the world. And they say, well, you come on and we'll take you on. And this course may lead then to the United States to start attacking Iran, at which point we'll say, whether it's true or not, that the Russians are moving down to help the Iranians, and then we would have the Jerry Falwell script for the Armageddon. We'd have the Commander-in-Chief script for Ronald Reagan that he has longed for, the Roosevelt Commander-in-Chief. We'd have an end of the hearings of the House and Senate, the end of investigations of Mr. Deaver, Meese, and Nofziger, and the rest that would follow. So this is a very dangerous position we're in, and it was planned very carefully. Imagine if Jack Anderson has one plan, how many more were made. I'm going to do more on the Persian Gulf in 1 minute, take a 1 minute break, and then continue on the Persian Gulf, because in addition to what is said by Admiral Poindexter this past week, or members of Congress who were so eloquent, the first priority right now is that scene over there as Reagan is anxious for a confrontation, and nobody is tying him down, tying his hands, or taping his mouth to prevent this horrible thing from getting any worse. We'll be back in 1 minute to continue with some of the Persian Gulf. This is Mae Brussell. It is side 2 of broadcast number 815, and I want to get into the matter of Kuwait. Remember the testimony of Albert Hakim, how he met with Mr. Ghorbanifar, and they had a session one-on-one where Mr. Secord and a representative of the CIA and other Americans were out of the room, and they discussed the possibility that in exchange for releasing American hostages, 17 convicted terrorists would be released from a prison in Kuwait. And this sounded pretty shocking, and people at home were very angry about it, not the masses of people who listen to the hearings, but members of the Iran-Contra panel. And then when Admiral Poindexter went to testify this past week, he said, yes, indeed, he agreed that these 17 convicted terrorists could be part of the deal would be to release them from Kuwait, and Oliver North confirmed that that 9-point program of Hakim's was not his program, that the Admiral, the National Security Advisor, Lieutenant Colonel North under Poindexter, and Hakim, hired by North, had agreed on a 9-point program to release these people from Kuwait. The Wall Street Journal has a story this morning, July the 20th. Schultz tells the investigators of Reagan's fury on hearing of plan to free Iran terrorists. Secretary of State George Schultz has told congressional investigators that President Reagan was infuriated when he was informed of a White House-backed offer to help formulate a plan to assist Iran to free 17 convicted terrorists imprisoned in Kuwait. Schultz's account conflicts with Poindexter, that Mr. Reagan personally endorsed this offer as part of a 9-point program in which Rear Admiral Poindexter had briefed him. Mr. Schultz, who learned of the proposal only after the Admiral left the White House, said the President was shocked to hear of this. These two accounts raise questions about how much detail was provided to the President when he was briefed by Poindexter last fall, and they add to concern in Congress about sensitive policy options presented to Mr. Reagan by a small national security staff anxious to continue their secret contacts in Iran. The 17-backed Shiite terrorists were convicted in connection with a series of bombings in 1983, December 83, that targeted the United States and French embassies in Kuwait. They killed at least 7 people. The 9-point program endorsed by the White House was put forward by Albert Hakim when he met in Europe, and with the understanding that Mr. Hakim and his partners and retired Air Force Major General Secord were developing a plan and assumed to free the prisoners, and Poindexter said, yes, I approved of it, and the President said he didn't know. Now, in their testimony, Albert Hakim had said that if they opened up relationships with Iran, he would stand to make many, many millions of dollars, that he worked there before and made many, many millions, and there would be a tremendous profit if they opened up getting rid of Khomeini and business as usual in Iran. Robert Owen testified that he was assured that if they overthrew Mr. Ortega in Nicaragua, there were tremendous profits to be made again, just as the Somoza family had. That was a good business, and that there was the large opportunity in Iran, and again, in Nicaragua, rather. And Mr. Secord also mentioned a huge profit, a business with himself, Hakim, as partner, if they had effected a coup and put their old Iranians back in power. They'd be back into this tremendous arms business because Iran bought more arms from the United States than any other single country. Now, the Washington Post had an article this past week that really shocked me, and I'm going to do the remaining part of the program with you on this article. There aren't many things that shocked me. Believe me, I've read the news for so long that when many stories come out, I just take them for granted that business as usual. But this one was this past week in the Washington Post, and it opened up a lot about Kuwait that I have not studied yet. When something comes in the news that's important, I try to understand it and get out books and articles on it. And the most I did on Kuwait was at the time that Sadat was murdered, I believed that Edwin Wilson and Theodore Shackley and Thomas Cline and Eric von Marburg, the group involved with the Iran-Contra, with Frank Carlucci's friend Ren Marburg, were involved in that company, Eatsco, over in Switzerland, to make huge amount of money of the arms sales as a result of the Camp David agreement of Jimmy Carter with Sadat. But just a few days after Sadat was murdered, the stock in Santa Fe, a company in California, went up tremendously, and on the board of the Santa Fe company was Gerald Ford. His best friend out here at Pebble Beach is in a jail, federal prison at the time, for making a large profit with advanced knowledge of the sale going up of involving a Kuwait oil company and a Santa Fe International out in California. Jerry Ford made a profit. He's not in jail, but his friend Darius Keaton made a profit on foreknowledge, and I felt that when Sadat was murdered, it would affect the politics, and I studied that much about Kuwait, that it would cause these people to buy early and low just before Sadat was murdered and make this hunk of money, which they did, and one went to jail for. Now, this article from Washington Post is titled, "Vast Wealth of Kuwait Incorporated Lies Behind the Reflagging of These Ships." This article came out 2 weeks ago, and I haven't seen it in any of the other newspapers reprinted, and nobody's mentioned it on the talk shows. If any of you have seen it, send me copies of what you've seen if it didn't come out of the original Washington Post. Gulf Tankers, a part of global holdings. This is by Jonathan Randall and Patrick E. Tyler. Within 2 weeks, U.S. warships are scheduled to begin escorting a fleet of 11 tankers. The Reagan administration has portrayed the escort mission as necessary to protect these ships from the fallout of the Iran-Iraq war. But by escorting these tankers, the United States will be also protecting part of what has come to be known as Kuwait Incorporated, an expanding overseas empire built around oil with a Western investment portfolio worth $100 billion. These are the people we're spending the money to protect. They don't put money into their own Air Force to protect their ships. We're going to protect them. They own property in England, Great Britain, Germany, and the United States that is equal $100 billion. And just add up what our debt is, making war and protecting these people. The article says they have massive real estate holdings and wholly integrated petroleum industry that is challenging the power of the multinational oil giants. The controversial escort task, only 9 weeks after 37 American sailors were perished on the USS Stark, was put together and has provoked criticism from those who fear that more American lives may be put at risk, and we were warned this week they would be. They'll be performing perilous duties in a treacherous war zone. According to Lloyd's of London, at least 325 vessels have been attacked or damaged by Iran-Iraq since 1980. As the United States raises its profile in the war, the concurrent role to be played by the Soviet Union, which has leased 3 tankers to Kuwait, has heightened the anxiety that Washington and Moscow may have cleverly been maneuvered by the Gulf Sheikhdom into competing to protect Kuwaiti interests. Kuwait International was founded by merchant clans that traded in pearls and imports since the days of Sinbad. It is unique among the Arab states that meet the western and southern shores of the Persian Gulf. More than any other Middle East producer, Kuwait thinks and acts as a corporation, and this is probably the work or help of the minds of, like Peter Drucker. They are a corporation as much as a sovereign state. We're not like the Saudis. We don't mix politics with business. Oil, which accounts for the greatest share of their revenue, is the primary source, but foreign investments is their business, and they're becoming increasingly important as the corporate state supervises and is run by the Sabah family, S-A-B-A-H. Until a few weeks ago, the 11 newly registered American tankers represented half of the fleet of Kuwait Oil Tanker Company. Until just a few weeks ago, it was half of their fleet. They had 11, they now have 22. It is a state-owned subsidiary, Kuwait Oil Tanker Company. It is a subsidiary of Kuwait Petroleum Corporation. The tanker company's chairman, Chief Ali Khalafi, is the government's Minister of Oil and member of the governing Sabah clan They have ruled and been major merchant families since the 18th century. The family sits as board of directors with one brother as chairman, another as crown prince, another foreign minister, on down the line. From the time of the skyrocketing oil prices, Kuwait opted their oil fortune to put in the West, rather than build 20th century monuments to its accidental wealth. Some of their neighbors, notably Saudi Arabia, plowed billions into airports, palaces, universities, weapons systems, unprofitable domestic industries. Kuwait invested in American and European real estate, corporate stocks, and established heavy industry in West Germany. During the decade, Kuwait set up 2 investment funds of $40 billion each. One of them is called Funds for Future Generations, and you believe it will be. Just to go back, they didn't put their money into weapon systems. They say to the United States government that is bankrupt, that has this tremendous debt, if you don't want communism, you protect us, and in the meantime, we'll buy America, which is what they've been doing, and the statistics here are shocking. So just remember, when they talk about the price of the commission, or not the commission, but the Iran-Contra hearings to investigate matters, that Mr. Hakim and Secord and Poindexter had a profit motive, probably very strong, in getting released those people in prison in Kuwait, and getting their finger into Kuwait politics that must be much, much deeper than we know. But Kuwait says, we don't waste money buying weapons, we'll let America protect us. They make fun of Saudi Arabia. So they have 240 billion funds, that's $80 billion total. One is the Fund for Future Generations. It gets 10% of the state revenue each year, and the government is forbidden from touching either the principal or the interest until the year 2001. This fund and the comparable General Government Reserve are the financial motors that have given Kuwait a major stake in the West. In a recent analysis, an American economist observed, besides exporting oil, Kuwait is a major exporter of capital. They're putting this money away and they're not going to touch it to 201. Kuwait's investments in the West involve $80 billion in government holdings, another $20 billion invested in super rich upper crust for the upper crust of Kuwaiti society. While oil reserves, with oil reserves second only to Saudi Arabia, the Soviet Union, and perhaps Iraq, Kuwait has plowed all of its money from its own oil industry and for a maximum income for years to come. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries says that nearly 1 million barrels a day is pumped from Kuwait. 1 million barrels a day. This insulates the country from sudden market shocks. And of course they have the cash to buy up property that is cheap, you understand? The crisis in the Gulf, brought on by the escalating tanker war, comes at a time when Kuwait has embarked on a bold expansion downstream to seize new oil markets and compete directly with international oil giants such as Exxon, Mobil, and Shell. Over the years, Kuwait made a series of corporate purchases to endow its oil industry with exploration. Among the large and most controversial of those purchases was the $2.5 billion acquisition of Santa Fe International, the United States exploration giant. In May, officers of the Santa Fe created the Chesapeake Shipping Company in Delaware for the sole purpose of assuming title to the 11 tankers used in reflanking operation. Now, it was that Santa Fe company that was so controversial that was bought up by Kuwait Oil, and as I say, Gerald Ford and his friend Darius Keaton were sort of instigators in the combining of the two companies and were on the board of the Santa Fe. This article says the tankers were chartered back. We got 11 tankers, Kuwait tankers, that were put in Delaware that were chartered, and they are chartered back then to the Kuwait Oil Tanker Company, a wholly owned subsidiary of Kuwait Petroleum, of which the United States has nothing to do with, gets no profits from, and goes back the favors we fly our flags for them, have the ships to protect them, the airplanes to protect them, but all of this goes back to the Kuwait people with hundreds of billions of dollars of cash, similar to the amount of cash Japan is accumulating. The article says the Kuwait Oil Tanker Company was established in 1959, 49% owned by the Kuwaiti government, 51% by private Kuwaiti investors. In 1979, following 2 years of heavy loss, they announced that they were going to buy up all privately owned stock when the prices went down, and so that they could totally own it. Part of this plan was to assume greater control over the shipment of Kuwait crude and refined oil products. They upgraded their tanker fleet. 4 new liquefied gas carriers came from a French shipmaker. They were purchased in 1979. 4 80,000-ton tankers from a Japanese firm at a cost of $25 million each. France made a tanker. Japan made a tanker. The United States didn't get any business from that. The following year, 2 large crude carriers were ordered from another company in Japan. I can't pronounce it. The Harimi Heavy Industries for a price of $156 million. The 10 vessels with a steam tanker built for Kuwait by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in 1977 compromised the reflagged fleet that will carry the United States naval protection. Kuwait's strongest market is the Far East, where they sell crude oil, and their refineries are in Singapore and Tokyo, and there is a growing captive distribution system in Europe that makes Kuwait unique for its emergence along with competition to the multinational giants. Kuwait's oil arm has not made up its purchases all at once. It picked up the Gulf Oil Corporation, their stations in Northern Europe, in 1983 after the Gulf was purchased by Standard Oil of Chevron. Last March, the State Oil purchased British Petroleum Station and the distribution network in Denmark. Outside the oil industry, the Kuwaitis hold substantial real estate values on several continents. The country's investment authorities have the second largest stake in Great Britain's real estate market, according to one source in Washington. Kuwait purchased choice properties in our own country, including the Columbia Plaza development opposite the State Department. In a major resort development project, Kuwait developed the KUWAIT Island off South Carolina coast. They own half the island. They'll sell half off from their profits. And in West Germany, Kuwait owns 15% of Daimler, the Mercedes-Benz, a share of the Volkswagen, the giant Hoshes chemical firm. More than half of Kuwait's vast investment portfolio is tied up in American corporations, with holdings in virtually every company on Fortune's list of the 500 largest industrial corporations. Don't think that Mr. Secord and Hakim, that came out of the Otto von Bolschwing network in California, that was set up for him, the head of Hitler's the Romanian Iron Guard that moved to California and set up International Imaging, his subsidiary. Hakim and Secord tapped into that. It was the United States worldwide Galen operation. Don't think they didn't know what they were doing when these guys came back from Iran and bought that piece of an office space with just some filing cabinets that opened up a network to continue the Reinhard Galen, Adolf Hitler objectives after and during World War II. These people are buying, as I say, into every single one of the Fortune 500 industrial corporations. Kuwait Incorporated has been discreet, however, in buying into the West, especially the United States, where a wave of anti-Arab, anti-OPEC sentiment swept through Congress at one time following the oil shocks in the 1970s. There's still fear that a new wave of resentment could flare. That's why we haven't read much about these activities, or else I've been ignorant up to this point. I plead ignorance, but I'll be more aware of Kuwait, and I certainly was at the time Sadat was murdered and the Santa Fe company in California was purchased. This Washington Post said to avoid disclosure requirements such as that of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on their holdings of 5% or more, Kuwait had generally spread its equity investment in the United States among many companies. That's why they bought into the 500 and buy property across the street from the State Department. Since the Iran-Iraq War began in 1980, Kuwait, which has no natural defenses or even sufficient natural drinking water, has been anything but neutral. Historically caught between its large and powerful neighbors, it has lived and it has also favored Iraq. Kuwait became a stalwart supporter of President Saddam Hussein's government in Baghdad and still contributes a large portion of its crude oil production to finance Iraq's war effort. Remember the war that's in the Persian Gulf. The United States and its allies encouraged Iraq to make war against Iran, to break the Khomeini government, to break them down, to bankrupt them. We were the ones that goaded them into this war. and we were going to be neutral, but we instigated and promoted persons that we were close with to tell Iraq to defeat Khomeini, put Iran back in the hands of the Savak and the Pahlavi family. It didn't work, so now we're going to help Iraq instigate a confrontation with Iran to do what Iraq couldn't conceivably do alone, and we couldn't get the hostages out in time for the election, so nothing else matters. It wasn't a matter of getting the hostages a week after the election. They were of no use to Ronald Reagan when the election was over, but the geostrategic part of the Iranian effort is very important, and the side effects of those persons helping assist this project are the profits that come from the narcotics traffic from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran that flowed through there until Khomeini came in and until the Soviet Union took Afghanistan and cut into a tremendous hunk of the profits of drugs that our banks need to keep them from toppling. Just to finish this Washington Post article, a part of that, it said if the Soviet had offered to flag these ships for Kuwait, it would have presented a problem or a conflict, but Kuwait dangled this in front of America. All they have to say is the Soviets offered us help. If the Soviet war material for Iraq, their tanks, artillery, and ammunition, and crated aircraft pass through part of the Shuaibah, it is allowed the Soviet material will pass through. It has tolerated overflies of Iraqi warpaths on their way to bomb Iranian targets. Its news medias have openly favored Baghdad, and there was the Kuwaiti alarm when the Iranian troops established a foothold in Iraq's southern border. Kuwaits argue that they have little choice but to help Iraq, even though the Soviet Union had been helping them, although it was never a tranquil neighbor. In 1961, Kuwait's new independence was challenged by Baghdad, and then this article goes on to December 83, where the Iranian-inspired Shiites from Lebanon and Iraq sabotaged Kuwaiti oil installations, and the French-American embassy compounds were bombed. Kuwait came under pressure in the spring of 84 when Iraqi airplanes inaugurated attacks on shipping carrying Iranian oil exports in the hope of crippling Iranian financial capability. For the first time, the perpetuators of these conflicts in Iraq, this article goes on, are now up to their you-know-what in trying to explain the American position and their position towards Iran and Iraq, except that the article goes into the confusions that the Kuwaitis have asked the Americans to protect their ships, and now we see that the Americans may have been blackmailed into making this stance at this time because we don't know what agreements Ronald Reagan made. We know at the time of the hearings on Taiwan and the fabrics coming in that Reagan vetoed a bill that was before Congress by Congressman Jenkins, the tariffs on imported cottons and fabrics from Taiwan or industry in Taiwan. And if it were not for the Iran-Contra hearings or the diversionary note or whatever, the memo that was found or the paper in Lebanon that exposed this team or Hassan's landing in Nicaragua, we wouldn't have known about those deals. So we don't know how much Kuwait owns this country and owns the politicians in this country that we are taking the position now that we're going to protect their ships. Casper Weinberger, the article continues, defends the position that he will protect Kuwait shipping. The Reagan administration will protect the shipping. American credibility among moderate Arab regimes has been eroding for other reasons than the Iran-Contra affair, also because they have this strategic alliance with Israel, the withdrawal of the Marines from Beirut, warns Washington's apparent unwillingness to follow through the assurances made by Jimmy Carter protecting the flow of oil from the Gulf. And so the article summarizes that originally Congress didn't have opposition to flagging the ships. Then when they found out the mixed-up policy of the President of the United States and the National Security Council and the Iran-Contra affair came out, they realized that we're getting closer to a war, and also this material brought out how they wanted to kill Khomeini, cause chaos in Iran, and putting the moderates in also meant shipping weapons surreptitiously and funding and approving of the overthrow of Khomeini, and this would bring other confrontations to the area, and all of a sudden Congress is waking up that something crazy is going on. Also in this article from the Washington Post, it was July 5th, incidentally, they have a picture of the ships reflagging the Kuwaiti tankers. This is what they will sound like. The Al Raqqa is called the Bridgeton. Al Funtas will be Middleton. Kozima is Townsend. al-Maradim is Sea Isle City. Al-Alish will be Surf City. Matraba will be Chesapeake City. Kasbah will be Ocean City. Kas al-Burgain is Gas King. Gas al-Mangish is Gas Prince. Gas al-Hamadi is Gas Princess. Gas al-Kuwait is Gas Queen. The King, Queen, Princess, and the others named after cities on the Atlantic coast. I don't pronounce those properly, but you get an idea of what I'm saying, that they have hundreds of billions. We're a country that is a debtor nation, the largest debtor nation. We're exceeding Brazil and Argentina. We're dirt poor. And they have their ships built in France and in Japan, and the profits come from Japan, and their money goes into Germany, and then they put it into 500 corporations, all 500 of the major ones, second only in Great Britain in the real estate, London owning real estate, Germany, Great Britain, United States, and their profits are increasing in value. And of course this has an effect on politicians, and this isn't brought out by why we're messing around with people in the Kuwait jail that bombed the American embassy and so forth. One other part of that article from the Washington Post is called Delaware Firm is the New Home of the Kuwait Ships, just to show how far we're going. The growing U.S. profile in the Persian Gulf. And I bring this up at great length because these are long articles, but Jack Anderson pretty well had the script in 1984, and I've kept it. I have pretty good files. I can't always find what I want, and sometimes I can find them, and I was able to locate the plans for the Persian Gulf, which seemed to be the script of the Reagan administration. This article from the Washington Post said, it is derided by critics as a sham company, hastily put together, formed in Delaware Corporation. It has no office, no employees, not even a phone number. The official mailing address is downtown Dover. Nevertheless, the Chesapeake Shipping Company, sounds okay, Chesapeake, good American shipping company with American names, was created just 6 weeks ago by the representatives of the Kuwait government and has suddenly turned into a key instrument of the United States foreign policy. As a lawfully incorporated U.S. company, the Chesapeake Shipping Company is the prime vehicle for implementing Reagan's controversial plan to put 11 Kuwait oil tankers with the United States flag and give them naval escort to their journeys to the Persian Gulf. It said, when the reflagging plan surfaced in the spring, many in the maritime community assumed it faced stiff hurdles, if only on regulatory or procedural grounds. How, they asked, can you convert a Kuwait oil tanker built in Japan and also France, manned by Arabs and Filipinos, into a United States vessel that will fly the stars and stripes, including, as I mentioned on a broadcast a week or two ago, the flag that came from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The article says, as the creation of the Chesapeake Company shows, the Kuwaitis are working closely with the top administration officials. They formed a U.S. company, and they will take title to their ships, and there will be special waivers from the federal ship safety and operating standards, thereby qualifying the foreign-built tankers to fly the United States flag. The expeditious way in which the Kuwaitis reflagged their fleet has aroused sharp criticism among the U.S. maritime industry, which complained that the American ownership and crew manning laws have been flouted in this process. I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of practicing maritime law, said Alan Mendelson, a Washington maritime lawyer and critic of the plan. They compare the United States to being a two-bit nation and running flagships like Panama and Liberia. 6 of the 12 directors of the Chesapeake, and listen to this Chesapeake Company that's going to flag it, 6 of the 12 listed directors of the Chesapeake offices as dummy front are officers from the Santa Fe Company, which I cited on the air 1983, we're going back 4 years ago, based in Alhambra, California. The rest are based in Suffolk, Kuwait, and 3 of them officers of the Kuwait oil tanker, the sole shareholder of the Chesapeake. So there are 12 directors of this Kuwait oil company, this dummy front, the Chesapeake. 6 come from Santa Fe, the corporation that is linked to Gerald Ford and his friend Darius Keaton in Pebble Beach. 6 in Kuwait. That deal, combining the Santa Fe with the Kuwait oil, was so smelly 4 years ago, and there was foreknowledge of stock manipulation by people knowing in advance that these two were going to merge, and 6 officers of this organization, this Chesapeake Shipping Company, come right out of the Santa Fe connected to Gerald Ford. My time is up, and I don't have time to completely finish this article. It's a very important one on taking these ships and flagging them with American flags. All of the profit goes to those people, except maybe the 6 board members and the Fortune 500 investments of Kuwait. If Kuwait gets more money, then more money buys to buy more corporations in America. This is a very, very dangerous situation brought on by people ignoring Ronald Reagan in California, almost cynically saying they deserve what they get. People deserve what they get. We had warnings about this, man. I shouldn't be so bitter. I'll just conclude and say this is Mae Brussell. I'll be back with you next week to talk some more about the Iran-Contra team and what they're doing to this country.